Hello, and welcome to the second part of the Sci-Fi Panel Generator tool. In this part, we're going to add some more details and also make high poly, low poly. So let's get started. So first thing we're going to do is we have a new layer, which is the layer detail, and based on these information, we'll be going to add detail. So the blue line here is going to represent lines that will be drawn on the panel, and the red dots are representing models that we can copy on these dots. So again, to get this information, I'm going to use the PSD trace sub, and then here I'm going to add our file again, and I will be using the detail layer. The geometry that's now generated also has the vertex color that is representing the colors that I'm using here that I've painted. Based on these colors, I can filter out what I need. So I will be using the split node here again. So we can look based on the color to split them up. So you can see here that the red is 0 and here it's 0.99. So we'll be going here and I will say it's bigger than 0.5, for example. Oh, I want the red information, of course, from the points. So now I have this information and I will be starting with the shape first. So what I would like to do with this shape is I would get one line out of this. And we can do this by using the skeleton 2D. And this is going to give a representation of the mesh. You can see that sometimes there is an extra line here. Maybe if we play around with some of the values, we can see that it's now gone. So if I preview my mesh, we can see that it's clearly following my original shape. What I want to do now is I want to use a sweep and a line to give it some volume. And we can already see here that this is not really aligning nicely. So a few things that I want to do is maybe place a fuse here. This is already helping a lot. And in case if something would go wrong, we can create a normal attribute, and this will control the direction, represent the normal. So if I type just n in the name, this will be the normal. So size will be 3 because it's a vector, and in here I will be placing 1 in value. So if I go to the sweep now, we can see that it's facing up correctly. Also in output, I want to change the skin to skin enclosed. I'm going to move this here to next to the first panel. I will create some space here. What I also want to do is use the X as a line, and I only want the change to be in the up axis, so the Y axis, so no change in the other ones, and I also want it to be in the center. So it will be cutting out in the panel. Then I want to use a boolean, and we want to use the boolean shatter one. So you can see this also here, it's set on shatter. So the first input will be our panels, and the second input will be this shape. and we can see this new shape laying here. Also notice that the boolean is now booleaning all the panels together, and this can cause sometimes issues. So I noticed that if I do a for each with connected pieces, that we might get some better results. So then I want to use this line information, which can be here. We can use some groups, so we can use the edge group. So AB will be this seam, so I'm going to enable this. And in the bevel node, I can use this AB seam information. So if I go here in group, you will find the AB seam, and then we can set this a bit higher and set the divisions to 1, for example, and then it would create something like this. We can see that the bevel is not perfectly doing its job, and one of the reasons in this case here is because of the straight skeleton 2D, and the points that are causing a problem are these points here, which we need to get rid of. So by the fuse, they are fused together, but we need to get rid of them. So I'm going to use the facet node, and I will be using the remove inline points, and I will be playing around with some values. And this already works for removing this point. Now going back here in this network, we can now see that the bevel is working better. Then I'm going to lower the value a bit, because it might be too much. And what could also be interesting is going to the profile. I can play around with shapes in here. But I'm just going to keep it to the round. I'm also going to delete the color here to see it a bit better. So attribute delete, and then points will be color. Then the next thing will be the red. We'll be using the red dots on the texture. So here, this will be the other input. So now we want to use this geometry, and I want to calculate the middle point of each red dot. So I'm gonna create a for each loop, connected pieces again, because we want to loop over the pieces. So we have 5 of them, and I want to do a fuse. Then again, if I increase this and disable remove repeated vertices, we will get the middle point of these shapes. And I can use this then to copy models on. But first, what I want to make sure is that these points are actually on top of my model. And the way I'm going to do this is by using a array. So in the array, the first input will be our points, and the second input will be the geometry. I would also like to move up my points first. So I'm going to move them up. So maybe let's say 2 or 3. And then I want to project them on the surface. And I want to make sure we are going to use a vector direction. Going to delete the channels. I'm going to override it by saying -1. And we can see that it's looking down on the surface until it finds something to collide with. You can, for example, also use minimum distance, but then you can see that it's looking for the minimum distance. So in this case, it was here. But if you want to have it perfectly straight down, then this should be fine. This information, I want to copy 2 points for a model. I already prepared a model, and I will be loading the model in by using the file node. And I can use this as detail. And I will also be freezing the model, so it sort of like stores the information. So if I would already place this in here, you can already see that it's working. So one thing I noticed is that this model is too big, so I'm just gonna scale it down. And I probably have to align the axis, as it's not really sitting perfectly on the surface. So using the axis align here again. So it's placed a bit better. What I could also do is use an attribute randomizer, and I play around with the normal, and we can see that it's like a bit random now. But if I go to discrete and fill in the 1, and I'm gonna put 0 in the other ones, we can see that it's more random now. So you can build in more control, but right now I'm just gonna leave it to random values. I would also like to have a system that doesn't use this texture layer. So I want to use a scatter node, and these points will then be used to place the model. But before I can do that, I should also place a voxel. So it brings everything together. And I also want to make sure that the points are generated on top. So right now, points are generated everywhere along the mesh. So I will be using a group node. So it's on primitive. I will be calling it top primitives. And I want to use the normal feature, and everything that it's looking up will be selected. So with this value, I can control what will be selected. Then I will be able to use this group in the scatter node. So the only places points on the top surface. So I can use a switch node here and switch between. I will use the random here and switch then between the different types of placement. So right now there may be too much. So 200 is definitely too much. So let's say 6. And you can already see here that the placement is not that great. What I want to do is to make sure that they will be placed more into the centers and not on edges. What I can do is I can use the curvature node, and this is going to return the curvature of the mesh, as you can see here. And I can then use this to make sure that models are not copy-pasted on these edges. So I will be increasing the range to boost the values and also the intensity. I will also do the same here for the convex and concave. So and these values will represent where I should copy a model or not. We can also use, for example, the blur amount to fine-tune it more, so we can find the perfect places where a model should be copied or not. So the next step is deleting all the edges, which are here colored white. So and this value is then stored in the color attribute. So if I use a blast node, and if I type in add color, if it's bigger than 0.5 for example, and I'm gonna put it to points, delete it. So I can play around with this value until I get a result I'm happy with. And then this information can then be used here in the same system. I'm also going to select all these nodes for the system, and I'm going to make a subnetwork because it's way easier than working in here. So let's call it detail meshes. Now I have some more room here. And we can also see that the placement is now better. So we can see it here, it's not on the edge anymore, it's just good enough so it stays in the right places. You can always go back to the blast node and then fine tune the value, or go in the curve node and increase the blur amount to make sure they are placed correctly. Your panel might be more symmetrical and these numbers are quite random, so what we could do is mirror these values so it will fit a symmetrical panel. As you can see, the symmetry works fine, but of course in my case it is of course breaking on some points. But it's a nice option to have if your panel is fully symmetrical. And I can also sort it here, so the first input might then be the image, second input is a random scatter, and the last input would be then a more symmetric approach. So once back here to the network, I will also be making a subnetwork of this one. And this would then be the shatter boolean for the lines. And I will be merging then these together. I also might go back here and delete the color. Attribute color. What I want to do next is creating the high poly version from this. I want to separate the panels from the pipes. So in here, the pipes, I'm going to delete this. And at the end of the merge here, I will use a voxel. And this will merge all the geometry together. So right now it's set to more low quality and we can lose some detail. We also go to smooth shading. We can see. We can also use the project to original. Then it would follow a little bit better the shape of what we input. And we can also smoothen it here. And this looks already pretty nice, except that we are losing a lot of detail. But the smoothness of the round edges is really nice to have. You can also look into the sharpened features. Then you can see that it breaks a bit more the smoothness that we had to stay with the sharpened features of the original shape. But for now I'm gonna first disable it, and maybe later on, if I feel it works better, then we can use that. I also want to go into a custom resolution, and I will be starting with a resolution from about 003. And you can see this is already way better than the one I had before. And of course, the lower you go, the high poly your model will get, but also the smoother it can get. But this result is already pretty nice, and it calculated pretty fast. So this is sort of like what I would do as the working resolution. And then if you want to do a final bake, I would create another voxel node actually, and then switch to that other node with higher resolution. Some other settings that could be interesting is adaptivity. So if I start with the low value like 0.01, we can see that it's going to put all the detail where it's needed. So in like the flat surfaces, it's going to get a way lower poly count, which if you go into lower resolutions, it will save up some space. So that could be useful to use. So in here I will be switching from the different sods. So and I will call it high poly quality. And in this one I will crank it, and in this one I will make the resolution a bit higher. Let's say make it the half of this one, so it's going to take a little bit longer, and we might be able to smooth it more if you want to get more smoother edges. Or you can use the sharpen feature and see how much that will affect on the shape. So it does a good job for creating this high poly, and you can go a little bit more lower if you want to, but for now I'm just going to keep it around 1 million. And I can always later on increase this if I feel I need to. So next I will be creating high poly from the pipes. We could also use the voxel here, but I prefer doing sub-deep modeling. And I will be using a group first, and this group will select all the edges I want to bevel. Some edges. I'm just gonna call it to bevel. And now I'll go here into the edges. And if I increase this value, we can see that it's going to select based on the angle. And this automatically does a good job on selecting what I need. So then I use a bevel, and I will be using the group that I just made. And you can see that it's already having the round edge there. So now I want to subdivide this result. And now it's looking more like a high poly and can be used to bake. I'm going to drag this down here, and we can merge them back together. Something cool we can actually do with this high poly panel is we can use the lattice nodes, and this can be used to then deform the panel a bit more into creating some more interesting shapes. So if I plug in the inputs, so first input is my model. For the second input I'm going to use the bounce. Then if I do an edit node of the bounds, and this is not working at the moment because I have to go to my bounds and put equal divisions as in the latest. So 3, 3, 3. So in here, click on divisions and 3, 3, 3. So if I now would move this part with the edit node, you can see that the panel is smoothly moving with it. We can also go from the Bezier to linear, and this would, the linear one would fit a bit more with the sci-fi style. It would be also possible to create, it is also possible to control this lattice based on a ramp, which I think is pretty cool. So based on what I'm doing here in the ramp, it's going to translate that with the lattice. So if I, for example, want to extrude this part, I can easily do this and delete the other ones here. So I can create this variation in there. So the way I've done this is, first of all, I increased the amount of divisions around the z-axis. Also, this value should be the same here in the lattice in the divisions. Then I used a gradient. So this goes from black to white, or from 0 to 1 along the z-axis. And this color information is then used for the ramp. So we'll be using a little bit of Vex, one line of code, to create this ramp. So first of all, we want to create the ramp so we can see it here and be controlled. So we're gonna type ch, which stands for channel, and then type in ramp because we want to have a ramp controller. Then we're gonna give it a name, and we'll call it shape controller. And then I want to give the value the ramp should look at and use. And this will be the color at cd.r. And the reason why I use this color, because it goes perfectly from 0 to 1 along the mesh. And the value that the ramp returns, we wanted to use in the up axis. So that means at points dot y, and we want to equal it, but we want to add the value to it, so we're not overriding it. And now once you will click outside of the box, it will recalculate, but we don't see our ramp yet, and then press this small button here, and this will create the ramp. So if I click here, you can see that we now have a small controller for this shape. At the end, you can also multiply by a certain value to control it. And this again, you can use the channels again. So if I type in ch, and by default it's going to create a float, and I call it multiplier, and press apply, then accept, and click on this button here again, and now we have a multiplier for the intensity. So I think this is a cool idea to create some more variations into your panel. So you can easily say, I want to move this part up, and then control the ramp here to move this part up. And as this is already a quite high poly model, we don't have to worry too much about it. And this would then be placed here. And here I'm going to create a null node and just calling it out high poly. And this is then the final look of my high poly. So the next step is creating the low poly, and I want to reduce the amount of polys. And I want to separate the panel from the pipes. So I will be poly reducing the panel So in here I will be poly reducing, and I'm going to say output polygon number, which is going to calculate. And right now we have 1000 primitives, and we can see here with the grid that our shape is getting easily lost. So I might have to increase the number of polys, and I'm going to use 2500, and we can see that this is already doing a better job. So also based on how small you draw your panels, like these bolts might not be the best idea to draw. You can always add them in normal map in Substance. So then I want to clean up the model a bit more. Let's say we don't need that much detail in the back. So I will be creating a group, and I will select all the primitives that are looking down. So down primitive group, and by normal, and the axis on Y should be -1 and the other one should be 0. Then the angle, I would lower it, and look here on how much I want to lower it. So make sure, like for example in this situation, this is already too much, so that should be fine then. Then I can simply blast away the down primitives. If you really don't need them, you can just blast them away then. You could also make sure that the small parts are also gone by using the small parts deleter. And we can also extract the largest piece. So in this case, this will work perfectly. Or you can play around with the threshold value. But you could also do another poly reducer and use the down facing primitive group here, and we can like reduce it by half, for example, so we really reduce the back side of it. Then we can switch to what we need. Then this is representing our low poly model, which has around 2000 primitives now. For the pipes, I want to actually use this mesh that we've built, because this is already in a more low poly state. So what you can do is go back into the pipe system and lower the poly count if it's a smaller model. For the pipes, I can, for my high poly, I will have an align one it's set on max, and for the low poly I will clip it first and then I will put it on a max. So if we don't need the other sides of the pipes, then we can delete it. What we can also notice is that these pipes are also using quite a lot of polygons, and later on in this video I will be making a system that is more optimized for the pipes, where I can manually say how much pipes I want and place them. Because right now they are everywhere, but for a panel in my case, where I only want to have maybe one pipe here, I don't need the full pipe on all the surface. But for now, let's keep it this way. But for now I'm gonna continue on making the low poly first. I'm gonna move my graph a little bit. Make some network boxes here, and this is the high poly creation, and this will be then my low poly creation. And I'm now gonna merge these together. One more small cleanup we can do is remove inside faces, which in some cases can be definitely useful, but in this case I don't think it's going to remove any faces. Then I'm going to do the unwrapping, and I will be using the auto unwrapper of the game tools. So I'm gonna go in the unwrap viewer, and a few things I want to change is, first I might look into another unwrapping mode to see if there is any big difference or improvements, and I like this method a little bit more. And I can also use the merge small islands, so this will get rid of the smaller areas I have here at the top, and this value might be too high, so I'm gonna add an extra 0 here. It still could be a little bit better, I think, and I'm gonna change this a bit more, 0002. And I also want the orientation mode to be axis aligned, so most pieces are then aligned along the axis. So you could play around with the values to see what you like the most. But for a moment I'm gonna keep it on the settings and see how far we can get with those. I want to add some normals, and I want to use the game dev soften normals, and here we actually have a setting to harden UV seams. So based on seams it will change some normals, and this is then null for the output of the low poly.